Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of the Timelines podcast. I'm here today with two really awesome guests. I have Brock Stevens and Jacob Van Buren. You may recognize them from our recent work on the Benrus project that they did for us here at the Watch Preserve, and I'm super excited to bring them on to the show. Brock, Jacob, how are you guys doing today, man?
Doing well, yeah. Just really excited to be here.
I'm really excited to do this. We were talking before we started. Usually I have one-on-one with a guest, and we just kind of talk about their involvement and their timeline, as it were, and hence the podcast name of their involvement in the watch industry. So this is a little different to have two guests on at the same time. But I'm excited to kind of just sit down and chat with you guys. We've known each other for a little bit in a kind of a big group chat. We're all kind of in the same corner of the watch industry. So I guess first things first, I'm just really curious how you guys met, because you both sort of exist in the same space of the watch world, in the very military, very history focused sort of realm. And you guys have done multiple projects similar to the Benrus project. So who met who first, and where did this all start?
Jacob, I'll let you begin.
Oh boy. It was at Windup, I guess, 2 years ago now, and we were at a small gathering hosted by Ben Lowry's family, and it came to light that we actually lived 20 minutes from each other, but we didn't know this until we ended up in Chicago, of all places. And shortly after that event, we sort of had, I would maybe call it our first sort of joint project, at an event Brock had put on in support of Project Recover, which I'm sure he will touch on a little more later, called Heroes of the Deep, where we did just a small little, I guess, photo shoot, basically, with some of the vintage gear I had brought along, and the TR660, which is still probably one of the more fun things we've gotten to work on.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first Windup in a lake event, that was really at Ben Lowry's house, like you said. That's where we met, and we were like, man, we really do live close to each other. Since we both lived in Williamsburg, we were like, we're gonna have to get together. So we just started becoming closer friends as time went on, and talking about watches and gear and hanging out, and so it just kind of spiraled out of control from there.
I knew you guys lived close. I didn't know that you lived literally 20 minutes from each other. That's crazy. I guess we should do a little bit of background for the listeners that are not familiar with y'all personally. So, Brock, you are a former legitimate U.S. Navy diver and have a huge background in that. And Jacob, you are what I would call maybe the vintage diving gear expert, somebody who actually goes and dives on this. Could you guys speak a little bit just about your personal backgrounds and how you came to watches, of all things, through that?
Yeah, Brock, take that away.
Okay. So my watch obsession was basically started because of my grandfather. He always wore a watch, and so that for me was like idolizing him as a child. I just grew up, wanting to have a watch as well. And so he actually gifted me one of my first watches, just a plastic Casio. Probably, I don't actually remember the model, but anyway, he gifted me one, and then ever since then I had a watch on my wrist. And so, as I grew up, I was just always interested in watches. And then I joined the Navy to be a diver. I just love the water, and sort of like divers' watches and diving and all that stuff became obviously a huge part of my life. And so I had this realization in dive school that maybe I should start documenting diving with these watches. Maybe create an Instagram, which I did, which is called Deep Sea EDC. And then it just kind of became a bigger thing as I went on from there, as through my career throughout the Navy after I graduated dive school, just taking photos on the dive side and trying to share my experience with people. That's like my real intimate connection with my watches is having them on my dives and throughout my entire diving career. So that's kind of how that all got started. And then, now I've kind of ended up meeting some great people just through the community and going to these Wind Up in a Lake events through Warning Wound, and doing some stuff for Marathon and, Mark II, but we can get into that later. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a little bit of my background and how it all started.
What does it look like So I think maybe for people that aren't super, in the military world, like Navy diver could encompass a lot of different actual fields and a lot of specialties.
Hmm.
So what exactly were you doing in your naval career?
So I was a
If you can talk about it.
yeah, no, I can talk about it. I mean, there's certain things I can't go into, obviously, but I was a ship's husbandry specialist, so I worked at a ship's husbandry command, which is underwater ships repair. We worked on aircraft carriers, submarines of all different sizes, different, pretty much every single warship the Navy has in Norfolk. It's generally one of the largest, if I think it might be the largest Navy base in the world. And so, I got a lot of experience working on every basically type of warship. And yeah, so I mean that's what we did. We did cofferdam installations, which basically it allows the ship to be still in the water while people can work on it internally. So essentially, you put a patch on the bottom of like a suction or a discharge sometimes, but mostly suctions, and essentially you take all the water out of that space internally because usually they're flooded with water, and you just suck it all out, and then that allows them to work on it, so you don't have to put the ship in dry dock, which saves millions of dollars in dry dock costs for the Navy. So that was primarily what we did a lot of the time. You know, we would do prop replacements, stuff inside the ballast tanks of submarines. You climb in there, climb up to the top and work on the vent valves, stuff like that. The vent valves basically allow the water um, to control essentially the water level in the ballast tanks, which allows you to control the ballast of the submarine. So stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it was awesome, and I really enjoyed it. It was hard work, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, I imagine, and maybe actual, repairing real machines and fixing machinery has maybe led to the Lego obsession. You think?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, my Lego obsession spans way before my Navy career, but yes, I mean, anything that I can really get my hands on to tinker with is any sort of like models or Legos or whatever. It all kind
Yeah.
of falls in the same realm for me. But
Jacob, is that why you think that you like the vintage dive gear so much? Because there's little things that you have to go in and then work on sometimes?
That's definitely part of it. I know as far as my background goes with Brock's, if you remove the military side, it's actually really quite similar. And I've got a type of brain chemistry where if there is something old, that's the thing I want to be working with or around. I can't help it. It's just the way I'm wired. I didn't even plan this, but Brock was talking about how he got in there. And my great grandfather collected pocket watches. And the first watch I ever bought, which I got back not terribly long ago, promise, again, not planned, but it was a little Westclock's Bullseye pocket watch with, plastic components and the movement and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been downhill from there in terms of one expensive hobby after another. But
yeah,
we ended up here with a pile of 50, 60, 70-year-old regulators and assorted equipment and tanks and whatnot that still get wet, which often really concerns people if they're at the same dive site.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure you could tell some stories about that. How did you? I mean, I imagine you started diving on normal gear. Like you started as a diver and then went to vintage. You weren't interested in vintage stuff, and this just said, "I want to learn to dive because I want to play with these things."
It was a bit of both. I I have not been diving nearly as long as Brock, but it started with the idea that, oh, this would be fun. And shortly after the idea got into my head, it immediately started moving towards, oh, there's all of this old dive gear that, to my mind, not everyone will agree, but it looks significantly cooler, for want of a better word. And that looks like more fun. I put that on the back burner though, got certified, but within a year I had already bought my first vintage regulator and shortly thereafter was messing around with that. So
Nice.
it was all downhill pretty quick.
That's like I sometimes, I love diving, but every once in a while I'm like, like if this regulator just decides to stop working, like I'm hosed, man. Like what am I going to do? Like you have your alternate obviously, but like even with modern equipment, that's kind of always in the back of your head. You know, I'm sure if you log as many dives as Brock, you kind of learn to calm that voice a bit. But like, I could not imagine diving on vintage kit. That maybe I'll have to try it sometimes. Maybe I'll go out and hang out with you guys and give it a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. There's enough of it to go around for all three of us to dive vintage kit. The biggest thing with regulators, and we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about regulators on a watch podcast, but fundamentally, they more or less have not changed significantly. There's differences, clearly, since they were introduced. If you want proof, look at Scuba Pro, still selling the Mark II, a regulator that was introduced in the 60s. It's a simple design. You can reassemble it on a dive boat if you have to. On the whole, once you start getting into like silicon caps for cold water resistance and a few other things like balanced, both first and second stages, yeah, a little more complicated, but on the whole, they're actually pretty simple, and it can be a little reassuring to know what might go wrong. I haven't had a mechanical failure from any old regulators. The only issues I've ever run into are mouthpieces not sealing quite properly because a metal second stage is different from a plastic one in terms of what mouthpieces will fit because the metal ones are a little thinner. And so sometimes, especially as you get a little deeper, you might end up sucking down some water, which is not an ideal scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. It's funny because like we talk about older regulators, the Navy actually just switched to these new Poseidon regulators from the Aqualung con shelves, which Jacob, you would probably be able to give a little insight on how long those have been in existence. But they switched to those, and all the other Navy divers that I know just complain about how they break and how terrible they are, and so everyone's kind of like, you know, it's not because a Poseidon regulator is not good. Don't get me wrong. It's because of the way we abuse our regulators in the Navy diving community, especially in ship's husbandry, where you're dragging it across, you know, like, or just like dragging it across like our dive boats and stuff for like, you know, it's just, there's always something happening in terms of a hard surface touching another hard surface in the diving Navy. So
I think it's interesting. When Jacob you were talking about, you know, how there really hasn't been, apart from maybe the quality of materials or kind of materials used, there hasn't been any technological or design changes to regulators, hardly at all in the past 50 or 60 years. And I was thinking about watches because honestly, I mean, exactly the same. Like your standard automatic movement with a Swiss lever escapement, like, hasn't really changed at all since they were introduced. And I think that's kind of, obviously we have things like silicone hairsprings, and we have, you know, greater power reserves, and we have different elements that you can put into it, like a coaxial escapement. But there is something really nice, and this is, I think, why we all appreciate vintage stuff as well as the modern components, is like when something is made well and when the design works and it's repairable, and you can fix it if you need to, there's something really beautiful about something that is essentially unchanged over 60 years and does exactly what it was supposed to do then, the same as it does now.
And I think that's probably the biggest draw for all of us when it comes to both diving and these old watches. I've said it in places before, but it's pretty much as close as you can get to time travel without all the baggage that goes with that.
Yeah, like messing up the alternate timelines or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you guys have vintage watches? I know, Jacob, you have maybe one or two, right? But Brock, do you have any?
Yeah, I really only have one. Well, actually, I have a vintage Seiko downstairs that was my wife's father's when he was in the Navy, which is non-working. The crown is rusted shut, but I'm not entirely sure what the reference is, but it's essentially a quartz turtle. Or maybe I think it's a quartz. Anyway, but yeah, I have that, and then I have my grandpa's Seiko Pogue, which was given to him when he was working at Northrop Grumman on the Apollo project, which is a pretty cool story in itself. But yeah, so I have this one. It does not work, unfortunately. I need to send it down to you guys to get it repaired.
Yeah.
It definitely needs a new movement, but yeah, that's my only other vintage watch, and kind of a classic in my opinion. I just love the yellow dial and the red and blue bezel. So
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to do worse than a nice flashy vintage Seiko. I mean, that vintage Seiko was my first vintage watch. It was little like a Seiko Lordmatic I got on the forums for like $200, and I was like, cool, this is rad, man. Like, what more do you want from me? It's really snappy looking watch. Yeah, you can go ahead and talk about your granddad now. I guess if you want to, Brock, since you brought up the Pogue, if you want to just talk a little bit more about that. I mean, this is what it's all about, right? Is like sentimentality behind these really special pieces, right?
Yeah, and so like I said in the beginning of the podcast, my grandpa was the one who really got me into watches, and then when he passed away in 2008, my uh, my uncle basically gifted me this watch, and so you know, he, like I said, this was given to him when he worked at Northrop Grumman, and then you know, I think by his manager, the story was changing from time to time depending on who you talk to. But yeah, so he worked on the Apollo project as a basically doing manufacturing for the Apollo capsules. And so, like, if you watch a movie Apollo 13, the window that you see going, you know, looking out at Earth, that's what he was building for them. And and so yeah, so you know, I have an original Apollo 11 patch from his when he worked there on that and stuff. And so as you can see, like the Apollo stuff is always been mesmerizing to me. Just you know, the whole concept, whether or not you believe they actually ended on the moon or not, that's a whole nother subject. But
Where this is turning into a
no, but I mean, you
conspiracy
know,
theory
it's
show now.
yeah. But no, for me, it was just like the ultimate achievement you can make in terms of an explorer and adventurer, and so anything related to that is special to me. And then the Pogue story and um, you know, or just anything really Apollo or NASA I'm into, and yeah.
That's awesome. So Jacob, how about your vintage watches? I mean, you know, I know you brought that West clocks up that you said had a kind of a family connection. What else do you have?
I've got a few. I'm wearing one today. It's a 1989 Royal Navy issued CWCG 10. That
Nice.
was one that I bought to commemorate some time spent living in England, and because I couldn't afford an issued Royal Navy diver, so I got the next best thing there. But vintage was actually my gateway into the hobby. I had a fairly strong focus on sort of mid-century time only. I won't go dress watches, but that's more or less what they were, because you could buy something like a very nice Gruen with a pretty interesting dial that ran for $45 on eBay, and that's what I paid for the one I have that I wore around for 2 or 3 years almost daily. And it was through that I eventually got a little interested in things like military watches, kind of like that GGW 113 that we were just talking about with Benrus. And I had asked my grandmother, like, hey, did my grandfather have anything like that? Because he had spent some time in the army during Vietnam, never in country, to the best of my knowledge, just in Germany. But she came back out with a gold-plated Hamilton that had been his father's, and that eventually landed to where I have both that and a early 20th century, I don't have the exact date, but somewhere in the teens, I think, gold Hamilton pocket watch that was also his when he worked as a lineman, I think, on the B&O Railroad in Ohio prior to the Second World War. Other than that, some odds and ends that don't work. I have a Landeron movement, I think a 148, so the dates at noon, gold plated chronograph that kind of runs. You can start the chronograph, but it stops when it wants to, not necessarily when you do it. So it was one of those things where it was pretty expensive to keep going down that rabbit hole. And as I got into diving, my collecting focus really started shifting towards dive watches and things that I wouldn't feel bad about beating up in the same way. But if I had like an old Seiko and it was pressure tested, I'd be taking it out.
Yeah, for sure. That's sort of a good segue into what I wanted to ask you guys about next. You know, in our little corner of the watch internet, there's, you know, Watches of Espionage has a phrase that we've all sort of adopted to heart, which is use your tools, right? And I think you guys both really exemplify that, both in using old tools that you've, you know, made to be usable and safe now, and then using your tools in harsh environments, like, you know, working under the bottom side of an aircraft carrier, right? So as you guys have sort of gone through this space, and we talked about Wind Up a little bit earlier, and you guys met and started working on that first project. What other things have you guys worked on together? I know Jacob, you have had some stuff published with Submersible Wrist, and I think Watches of Espionage too, right? And then I mean, Brock, obviously, you are now working with Mark II and Tornik Rayville. So obviously, the work that you guys were doing is now really taking off. I wonder if you guys could just speak a little bit about like how you really got started and where you saw your first kind of big success and big reactions from people.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, I guess all of it goes back to like my Instagram, my Deep Sea EDC page. And that kind of started the, like I said, I started taking pictures of my watches at work and diving with them and stuff. So, I think in terms of content, it was fairly unique to like what most people were doing. And so that kind of just brought a wider audience to diving with watches and stuff on my end, at least for the military. And then, you know, I kind of just went from there in terms of, like I said, meeting everybody and then going to all these events and getting to like hang out with all you guys and become friends with you. And, just, I think in the space of watches, everyone, whether you use your watch or not, the people enjoy seeing people using them for what they were meant for. Because it's sort of like that, like you look at a watch and to most people, it's like, it just screams adventure. And like, that's what all the marketing throughout the years has been about is using them for going mountaineering or going diving or whatever. And so nowadays, I think it's sort of coming back full circle, especially more of the analog experience. I think people are kind of wishing to spend more time outside, more time doing stuff. And to me, I think that that is watch culture, and it's at its finest is people taking these things and actually putting them through their paces, as Asha would say. And like it's just great to see that, and it's great to meet a bunch of people that live by that same ethos. And brands that are really coming out of the woodwork to be like, yeah, we should be using this and showing that our tools are good in this specific environment. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I see it going now, and why I think all of this has been really fun to do. For the most part, it's just been because we're getting to, Jacob and I are going diving or doing photo shoots where he's diving vintage gear and vintage inspired Tornik Rayville TR660. And it's kind of like it just brings you back to that golden era, and that to me is what makes it special. So
And to go off Brock, it was his suggestion that even launched what I guess we could call it a presence that I have, because I had complained, I think, one too many times that it doesn't make sense to me where we have, especially over the last 15 years now, such a huge emphasis on reissued designs from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we'll throw that in there, but from the middle of the 20th century at least, where there are these great reissued dive watches, and if you see them underwater, it's with brand new kit, which is fine. It's great to even see them being used, but to my mind, if I see, we'll go back to Tornik Rayville, a TR660, something that was issued to the Navy sort of starting in the late 50s, especially with them getting their hands on Blanc Ponds by 1958, for example, up through the 60s, I want to see that being used with kit from the period, because for the most part, the end consumer probably isn't going diving with the watch. Not regularly. Some do, clearly. But if you're going to go full steam ahead on selling that idea of adventure and purpose, then I want to see it being used with what it would have originally been used with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to Brock's point, like at the end of the day, it's kind of all sales, right? The companies want to advertise the watch and really hype up that romance behind what they're getting you to buy and put on your wrist. Who do you think is doing it? Like, what brands right now do you guys think are doing that the best? I mean, from micros to big brands like Tudor, Rolex.
I mean, I, I people will probably call me biased for saying this, but I do think, and this was before my time at Mark II and TR, but with the most recent release of the Fulcrum 39 and the Tornik Ravel Blackjack that Bill did before the Fulcrum 39, I think honestly I'd have to say Mark II TR, which is part of the reason I was inspired to want to work for them, was because they were putting all this effort into these zines and alternate timelines and using real props, that are authentic to the time period to kind of create this essentially beautiful world that you can dive into. And I think it's been kind of brought out into the light a lot more with the Fulcrum 39 release. The zine that comes with that is honestly, I think, truly a great piece of art in terms of photography, but also just the storyline is interesting, and it kind of brings you into that world of adventure that I was talking about earlier. And so I truly believe that now I work there, so people can say what they want, but I truly believe if I was looking at it as a watch enthusiast going into it, I think they are doing it the best currently. But you see good stuff from Tudor, like the Man in the Sea Museum release of the Black FXD. A lot of people kind of forget their history sometimes, and that's a real shame. But you're definitely starting to see it more. People going back to that because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, for any of our listeners who haven't had the opportunity to see any of the watches from Tornik or from MK2, could you guys just like very quickly just give a rundown of that company, like who started it and what the company's all about?
Yeah, I mean, so Bill Yao is the founder of Mark II, and then later Tornik Rayville. Well, actually, he didn't found Tornik Rayville, but he essentially acquired the IP for Tornik Rayville later on because people just forgot about it. They were, basically, so Bill Yao founded this company creating customized parts for watches, to mod watches, I think in the early 2000s, 2002. And he's obsessed with quality and making sure that he's putting out the best product that he can for people. And people caught on to that very quickly. And so he started doing these mod parts, and eventually it led to him creating his own. I think the Paradive was one of the originals, but he essentially decided he was going to take these vintage watches that he loved and make modern versions of them, because sometimes vintage movements are hard to find. It becomes really expensive, and basically this would allow it to become more accessible to people that couldn't afford the $4,500 to $9,000 Benrus Type 1 or Type 2. So he started doing that, and then it's kind of taken off from there. He started doing other designs. The Fulcrum was one. There's the Sea Fighter, and so then he bought the Tornik Rayville IP, did the TR660, and so it's been that's sort of like a quick and dirty timeline of his his escapades in the watch space. But yeah, I mean, and now we're just kind of focusing on really trying to bring people into this world, and I hope that I can be a better part of that, and trying to bring people that I care about and really cool stories that I've heard, and try to bring them to life for everyone to check out. So
I love that. So I think that's what the watch industry, at least in my view, that's where it really excels. The big companies are always going to be fine, right? But the difference, I had this conversation with a customer a couple weeks ago, and he's really big on the high end independence.
Mm-hmm.
And he's bought a couple MB&F watches, and MB&F they'll like fly them out for special retreats and dinners and things. And I was like, if you spent the same amount of money with Rolex, they wouldn't care. They would just be like, cool, it's another guy just filling up their pocketbook. But I think independence is where the watch space is really doing some great work, because it's so much more personal with the customers. It's smaller, there's much more attention to detail, I think, for the most part. So I'm a huge fan of independence and smaller brands, and I think that's where the enthusiast space of the watch industry really can shine.
Yeah. It's really cool to see, what independent brands have been doing. And not just Mark II TR, but everyone recently. I mean, the terms of quality, the step up that everyone's able to produce nowadays is pretty amazing for what you're getting. And I think it's also pushing the big manufacturers to do better, just because what's available at a lower price point. And I think that's exciting to me. I mean, I'm sure this has been talked about to the end of time, but it's still exciting to see the smaller companies pushing the bigger companies and putting some just really cool stuff out there that I think when you're forced to compete against someone like Rolex or Tudor or Omega in that space, you're going to become more creative, and come up with better marketing solutions essentially to um, kind of bringing that personal flair that
Sure.
so yeah.
Do you think, and this is a question that like I feel like watch people have been asking for the past like 8 years. Do you think that the vintage reissues are sort of reaching their end, or is it too saturated with vintage reissues, or do you think that there's still going to continue to be a market for that in the next couple of years?
um I mean, I
Jacob
think
has thoughts.
I think people are always going to be excited about a watch that they wanted that's a more modern version, just because of the fact you're getting a modern movement, you're getting modern QC standards, you're getting things, that, back then the water resistance of 200 meters, they said that it was 200 meters, but who knows what it really was, like it's just nowadays you're actually getting stuff that is put through the proper testing, for a way cheaper price. And I think that um, I think there's definitely room to grow in terms of what modern reissues are. I think people can improve them in other ways than just making it an exact copy. Um, which, like you've seen with Aquastar, like with their new Benthos release, like they're doing some stuff that's, it's a helium escape valve, dual crown or whatever, but it's a little bit different than what they put out before. It's not, and so I still think that's exciting to people no matter what.
Jacob?
And you make a valid point, Michael, when you talk about a feeling of, I don't think malaise is the right word, but certainly there's a significant group that feels this point of saturation to the point of maybe even excess of vintage inspired designs on the market. And there are more than there need to be, in that if you want a vintage inspired skin diver, off the top of our heads, I think we can probably name 20 different options you could go with. But it's the question of finding one that speaks to the particular thing you're looking for and the price point you're looking to spend. But I agree with Brock in that, and I have a dog in the fight in that I want there to be more, because there's a lot of watches that you cannot get, or at least get within a price point that you're prepared to, within a certain design, without either going vintage and spending more, or just something that you're not comfortable wearing due to the associated rarity of it. I mean, we could talk, for example, like the T graph that's on the poster behind you. They made what, 200, 300 of
Yeah, a
each
couple hundred. Yeah.
colorway over a
Hmm.
few year period. You can't find one. But if that's reissued, like they still sell the current professional one. I don't know if they've done a Shark Hunter or a Sea Rambler off the top of my head, but that would give
Not in
someone
this
the
current generation.
right. I think there was that earlier design that's not quite the one to one there, but
Hmm.
that gives someone the opportunity to own something that they're probably not going to, or even on a more democratized scale. Black Bay sales, while on the secondhand market, are downright affordable now. I mean, you can get one for what, two, versus
Yeah,
the near
yeah.
four retail on a new one. So you've got some room, but they're still exceedingly popular, and things like the 54 show that there's still a market. It's just changed in how we're doing sizing. Like when Longines first brought back the Heritage Diver, they kept a larger case, and the original ones had that, but it's a pretty big watch. Like Brock can get away with it because he's built for it, but if you and I were trying to go for it, it might not be the right fit for us. But now we're seeing a change in case sizes and a greater emphasis, like Brock is talking about, with finishing and little add-ons you get. like clasps have improved significantly over the last just 5 years, and that's trickled upwards in what people are expecting from a 3, 4, 5, $6,000 watch. So it's
Sure.
probably the one of the best times in recent memory if you want to get into this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, obviously my dog in this fight's a little different because I work for a vintage dealer. But I think even still the value proposition, if we talk about things that are super rare, right? Like the thing that comes to mind is Omega's latest the Speedmaster variant that they did that looks like a 2998, right? That's not the limited edition. That's always out there. That's a fantastic watch, and a 2998 will cost you more money than the reissue, right? So that's what, to your point, Jacob, about people, looking for grail pieces that they may never be able to find. Like that, I think is a very, very valid point. I would argue that when you move down price points, things that are out there, like, I don't know, look at like Universal Genève that's out now, right? Like, how expensive do we expect those new pull routers to be? I mean, they're probably going to be 4, 5, 6K or higher if they're doing it in a precious metal. I mean, you can still find beautiful Universal Genève things, even pull routers now for, I don't know, what are they trading at now, like 3? So I think that there's still a value proposition for a lot of vintage stuff that is not like a grail piece. And I think that you can have the best of both worlds. You can have the really cool vintage pieces that are still attainable and still relatively easy to find. But if you want to go for something that you'll never be able to find, maybe the vintage reissue is the best way to go about that.
It's like if you want to talk about, I don't know, chronographs come to mind. Like vintage Hoyer is an untouchable market. And depending on what you're looking for, like out of a Carrera, maybe those 90s reissues are the ones for you. But if you still want original sort of period vintage, then we have things to talk about from Gallet, Movado, even Inocar to some extent, especially once you move to the dive side, where you are going to save, but also get something that's a little less common. And if you like vintage anything, you are probably the sort that subscribes to getting a little extra thrill if it's something that's uncommon.
Sure, I think too. It also depends on where you're looking at. Vintage Hoyer, like the two examples I've got in the shop right now, are both under 8,000. Serviced original examples, like super super clean. And I think if you're in that market, like what's the difference? How much is a glass box Carrera retail, or how much is an Octavia retail? 7, right? For a brand new one, you spend $1,000 more, and you get the vintage one. So it all just depends on what people are looking for, I think, to put on their wrist. But
Yeah, 6,600 for a new glass box Carrera, but that's 39 versus 36 if that's something that matters to you, because that wearing experience is going to be completely different.
yeah, exactly, totally different. And this, I think, also to the point that you were talking about, Jacob, like with case sizes reducing, um, is a really good selling point for actual vintage right now too. Is a lot of people come in and they're like moving away from big watches. I've had, or also sometimes it's surprising too. I've had people come in and they say, "Oh, I need a 42 millimeter." I was like, "Well, just try on like this 38 and just see." And they'll try it on. They go, "Wow, this wears really really nice." I'm like, "Yeah, you don't really know until you try these things on."
And I was just going to say, a huge selling point, especially if we're talking, if you just want a dive style watch, we'll phrase it that way. Take a vintage skin diver and put it next to a modern equivalent. The thinness is night and day. And the resulting comfort for that is a huge selling point for going for the vintage option. So think of something like a vintage skin diver, for example, compared to a modern reissue equivalent. I'll throw Aquastar out there because the Model 60 is kind of the progenitor of this sort of genre in some respects. And if you do 1-to-1 there, there's little tweaks like the thickness of bezels, and then most notably the case profile, where that's night and day. The thinness that you can get from a vintage reference compared to a new one. Now, water resistance notwithstanding, the wearing experience for most people in terms of comfort is probably going to be better on the vintage side because you can just forget that you're wearing them in the best way versus something where you're always noticing it.
Yeah, and I think it's weird with like even something like my 6309, like my turtle. On paper, it's basically the exact same dimensions as the modern reissue, but there's something about like a slight molding in the case design that just makes it feel like it wears smaller. And I tell this to customers all the time. I'm like, with vintage, you can't really trust with the case dimensions that I say that they are, because there's, I don't know what they were cooking or what they were smoking when they were making these vintage watches, but it's just, I don't know. There's just this certain je ne sais quoi that makes them wear very very well and feel really special. And I've noticed this with my personal watch collection. I still have modern watches, and I still love my modern watches. But if I pick up a modern watch now, I say, "Oh, this is, it's super well made. It's really really clean. Like, look at this high tech movement." And I look at it, I'm like, "Yeah, but I wish there was a little patina. Like, I wish there was just a little like showing that it has like a bit of a story, or that it's done something kind of special, you know." Um, yeah, I don't know. For me, I'm really starting to fall in love with the aged look, with the patina and the history and everything on vintage.
Yeah, the age stuff is something that's been on my mind recently. Like when I first started getting into watches, I was very like, I don't really want to ding this on stuff. Like when I was younger, especially, like I was like, oh, I spent so much money on this watch, I don't want to mess it up, right? And then as I went through the Navy and stuff, when I started, like I was diving with my TR 660, for example, just like dinging it on ships and whatever, and just like causing all these little scratches. Now to me, it's so special because of all the memories that I had with it or whatever. But I think that's part of the reason that makes vintage stuff so special, is like obviously family history. If it's been there for a long time, it's like, oh, my grandpa wore this while he was doing, working in the yard or whatever, or like, working on his car, or memories that you had with him and stuff. And so I think with any sort of vintage piece, it's kind of like, it makes you wonder, number one, like, what is the history behind this? Like, why is this the way it is? Or like for the example, the Benrus that we're going to get to talk about, the Type 2 that we shot, like all of the stuff on that, all the dings and dents under the bezel, you're like, what did this guy go through that was wearing this watch? And it's like, it makes it so much more interesting. And so, I mean, with modern pieces, it's nice to have stuff that's modern and that you could put your own scratches in. But, I think there's definitely something to be said about a vintage piece that, has a little bit of history to it. So,
Yeah. So what we're really saying is that everybody needs both. You have to have vintage
yep.
watches, and you have to have modern watches. Brock, thank you for that wonderful segue into talking about the Benrus, because we'll put the pictures of the watches up on the podcast, obviously. But yeah, we recently sent you guys just a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure when this podcast will air, so it could be 8 to 10 weeks by the time.
Months ago now.
Months ago, and last year, in fact. We sent you guys two Benruses. We sent a GGW 113. Did I get that right, Jacob?
Pretty sure it's the reference number, because halfway through, we didn't look at the case back like complete amateurs, and we're thinking, this is an MILW 113 or whatever the particular specification is, and then we flipped it over. It was like, oh no, we're talking about the
wrong
variant.
Watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we sent you guys that, which is the field, like the general issue field version, as well as that's not the field version, it's the pilot's version, right, Jacob?
A higher grade
higher grade, as well as a pretty uncommon, very not easy to find Benrus Type 2, which is what Brock was talking about. And that thing is chewed up. I mean, there's some really crazy marks on the bezel, on the case as well. It's a really special piece. So yeah, so we sent that over to you guys to do some photography, and also Jacob, you wrote an awesome article about that. Talk me through your process. I know that originally you wanted to go kind of like an army surplus route with the story. How do you find, like, if you get watches in and someone's just like, write a story, like how do you guys kind of figure out what angle you want to take, and walk me through, start to finish with that?
Well, I mean, Jacob, you can start since you wrote sort of the story that went with it. So,
yeah, and this will be highly specific, I guess, to my own thought process here, but depending on it first depends on what it is we're even talking about and what we plan to do. So if we've got a reissue dive watch, we're taking it diving, then that's a very different set of circumstances where we can talk about some of the adventure aspect of it. And with this one, we were originally thinking we might be able to factor something like that in, but it ended up making a little more sense to, especially with just the sheer amount of character that both of these had, that whatever we could talk about with them wouldn't be as fair as just presenting them as they are and with the stories of the types of people that would have worn them, as well as just what makes them so special. I have the sort of hero image that Brock put together with the two side by side on top of a surplus. I'm pretty sure that's a grand cartridge belt and some period manuals. And you don't get that out of any of the new ones. And the new variants of both are excellent watches, and you can wear them every day and do everything with them. But something that has that amount of, you can't even call it patina at that point. It is, it's not destroyed, but it is, if you saw it behind a glass case in a museum somewhere, you would think something really bad happened to the guy that was wearing this, or that he went through the absolute ringer, and there has got to be some kind of story here. I have never seen a case where you have deep indentations underneath the bezel like that, and yet it runs, it keeps time, and it's really comfortable to wear. So you really get the best of it.
Yeah, that's what's special about the vintage, right? Is the history behind everything. I'm curious if you guys agree with me. When I shoot watches, the modern stuff is just like turn and burn. Like, it looks pretty, you look nice. And then when I'm shooting vintage, I'm like, oh man, there's all this here. And then I'm like, oh yeah, like that's on the watch. Like, it's not that I'm taking bad pictures of it. It's just all on there. Do you notice any different, like, Brock, were you inspired in a different kind of way when you were shooting vintage pieces versus some of your modern product stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it kind of goes like in my thought process of how, like, for example, for this photo shoot, like, obviously I want to use props that are from the time period and stuff, but like when you put it on the, let's just say, ammo crate, right, and you put it there and you see it with all of its scratches and indentations and stuff like that, like, I don't know if it necessarily changes like my process in terms of my photography, but just the way I start envisioning a story um, is definitely more. It's just like really fun to do, but also like I just like in my just imagination, I'm just like, okay, now it's like, all right, what would this go with in terms of other vintage things to make it look like this was just on some guy's nightstand that was made from a, from his crate that they shipped to him in Vietnam, like stuff like that. Like, I start just imagining that sort of storyline and what it would look like. And like, it's, you can do it with modern stuff to a certain extent, but it's not, it's like, okay, like, what does this look like on your nightstand next to your, modern made bed from, the local furniture store? It's very different than like, what does this look like in what would be like where the SOG guys were staying in Vietnam or something, like, what is that like? So that part of shooting vintage, to me, specifically this Benrus, was extremely fun. And I think Jacob and I had a good time. Like, I definitely got some cool shots of him wearing it, wearing tiger stripe camo and other things. But you can kind of see also, like, it's so cool to see how those period pieces and period gear just like look like they're made for each other. And it just like kind of just all melds together into this like just really cool image. It's sort of like movies that are like period pieces. You have all the cars, you have all the signs and stuff like that. Same sort of thing, but it's fun to do vintage stuff for that reason.
And even from the technical standpoint, I know that from when we were working out the lighting as we were standing there, it's the sheer difference in not necessarily materials, because stainless steel for the most part is stainless steel, unless we're talking about like some early chrome brass stuff, but that's besides the point. And then you've got probably the biggest difference when it comes to your lighting process of, this is acrylic or plastic. There is no anti-reflective coating. but it behaves entirely differently from sapphire and sapphire with coating in a way that further brings in, I don't want to use the cliche, but the warmth that you can find through some of these that further just makes it melt into any of the period kit that you can surround it with, which is really part of the appeal of getting to work with original objects of multiple sorts like this.
Yeah, I really loved the story that you wrote, Jacob and Brock. I mean, the photos are so evocative, and it to your point, like you said, some guy just threw it on his nightstand. It really does kind of feel like that. Everything in the pictures that you guys made feels very organic, and I guess in a way, when you're shooting modern stuff, it's like you are creating a story behind it because it's a new watch. There's no backstory, and you have to make it. When you're shooting with vintage, you are like discovering the story, like you're finding it and piecing it together based off of how it all feels. So if anybody has not yet read the Jacob's article, it's on his Substack under Seaview, and then definitely take a look at our Instagram and Brock's Instagram, Deep Sea EDC, to check out the rest of the photo report as well. They're awesome pictures. Do you guys have any projects that you're working on? Anything that's coming up? I know you probably can't talk about all the details, but I know you guys are staying busy.
Go ahead, Jacob.
I was about to say, I know what Brock's about to say he has coming up, and it is significantly more exciting. I'm currently working on a few other stories for a few different venues in the space, as well as my trying to keep busy with getting ready for dive season over on Seaview, because frankly, it's cold, and I don't have a vintage correct dry suit at this stage, and a 50-year-old U.S. diver's wetsuit isn't exactly going to keep us warm. So we're getting ready for the season to pick up and to hopefully get to do some photography, as Brock has made a recent change that he may or may not want to talk about that's going to allow us to do some pretty exciting work this year.
Nice. Yeah, Brock, what can you talk about?
Well, I think what Jacob's referring to is having a very nice underwater housing from Jason Heaton. We worked out a deal, and so now I have it's definitely going to up the game of photography in terms of underwater stuff, which I'm very, very excited for. So there's that, and then there's also I'm going to be going on a trip to Palau to be diving with Project Recover, and we're going to be doing some pretty cool stuff. A lot of it I can't actually discuss in terms of what exactly we're looking for on this specific dive, but let's just say it's for a I have to be careful with my words here. But basically, we're going to be diving on an old World War II aircraft that crashed in the water there. And, just doing some research for another specific mission, which was this one I can talk about. It's 3 missing UDTs that have been missing since World War II. And they've been looking for their remains for a long time. And so we're testing out some really cool technology that was built with Project Recover, or in collaboration with the University of Georgia, essentially being able to test water samples from soil to see if there's DNA of essentially the people that we're looking for in that specific area. So it's pretty new technology, and it'll be very exciting to use. But something I definitely should mention for that trip, we had some really great people in the watch community and also like gear community reach out and want to help with the trip and sponsor it. And so not necessarily sponsor it, but give us some cool gear to use and for the expedition. So PDW donated a little over like $6,000 worth of gear and backpacks and stuff. And Watches of Espionage donated some watch straps for all the Mark II TR watches we'll be wearing. And so, pretty exciting stuff. But yeah, it should be a really fun trip. It's definitely a really long flight, which I can't say I'm looking forward to, but I think the outcome will be awesome. So
yeah, when is that?
So I leave the 27th of February.
How's your packing going?
Not well.
Are you bringing gear with you, or are you sort of renting once you're there?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna rent tanks and stuff. I'll have my own regulator set, and I'm not gonna be needing to wear a wetsuit. But PDW donated some other waterman jackets, which are perfect for the warm water diving situation. So we'll be wearing those. But yeah, the gear list is coming along. It's going to be extensive because it's a pretty long trip, and a lot of gear is needed. So I'm getting that together. I'll be posting some stuff on my socials of sort of cool pictures, flat lays of how everything kind of came together, and just like all the gear I'm taking with me, just so you guys can get kind of an idea what it's like to go on an expedition like this. I probably am going to bring more stuff than I need, but we'll see. It'll be
Yeah,
fun.
I mean, I feel like in that situation, it's probably better to overpack if you can, because I guess you never know what you need. Is this your
Mm-hmm.
first? Is this your first trip with Project Recover?
Yeah, so this will be my first mission with them. So I just became a member in October of 2024. They have a pretty long interview process, and there's a lot of people that are interested in joining for sometimes the wrong reasons.
Mm,
Since you're going to look for vintage aircraft, there's people that want to just try to take the parts or whatever.
sure.
Collectors and stuff, like a lot of valuable stuff is there. So like they have to kind of weed out the bad eggs in terms of the interview process and all that. And I mean, this is something that I knew I wanted to do since I was in dive school. I watched a movie, which I recommend if you are interested in the subject. It's called To What Remains. It might be on YouTube now, but it's basically a documentary on Project Recover and what they do. But I saw that, and then in dive school, I was like, I'm gonna do this as soon as I can. And now that I'm in the diving reserves, I'm able to go on these trips, and it all ties into my watch stuff as well. So it all kind of works out for everybody. But yeah, so it's uh, it's all very very exciting, and I really can't wait to share with everybody all the cool details and stuff. And I may or may not be writing an article. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, what a great cause to put your time and effort into, and that's such an amazing thing to be a part of. And I really look forward to seeing the content that you do from that, and Jacob for the stuff that you're working on too coming out soon. I can't wait to see that. I believe we're pushing up on our 50-minute mark, so we're gonna need to start wrapping this up, guys. I really appreciate you guys hopping on and just kind of chatting and talking a little bit about what you guys do, and hopefully we can do some more content. I know Brock, you've been kind of itching to get some more of our watches out there, and
yeah.
I'm gonna get you guys a dive watch. I'm gonna try it. The original plan that we had for our content was a amazing Aquadive, the Model 50 with the built-in depth gauge on there, and I was really hoping that you guys could dive it. I took it to our watchmaker because our pressure machine is broken. I was like, hey, let's just do the dry pressure test first, and he puts it in, and he turns it on, and it goes beep 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 beep. It just immediately failed. Immediate, like it didn't even try, and I was like, ah, shit. Well, okay. So I'm gonna try to get you guys something that we can put on your wrist and take underwater here eventually soon. But um, I know we've already mentioned some of your social medias, but if you guys just feel free to just push everything else besides the Instagrams. I know Jacob, you're on Substack. Is there any place else that people should look for your stuff, guys?
I mean, Instagram's really the only place for me right now. I eventually would like to branch out to other stuff, but yeah, as of right now, it's just Deep Sea EDC on Instagram. And if you want to give me a follow, I'd very greatly appreciate it.
And on my side, like Michael said, I have the Instagram, and they wouldn't let me have the specific one I wanted, so it's CSEA underscore view, VW, or not VW, VUE, and then a Substack at cview.substack.com that I need to get better at being a little more frequent with, but with how busy things have been over the last 6 months, which I can't complain about, we've been working on a lot of fun things.
Um, Thanks so much, guys. It was a real
Yeah,
treat chatting with you guys, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Of course,
yeah,
thank you for having
absolutely.
us. It was a blast.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. It was great hanging out.
Of course, thanks everybody for tuning in to episode 10 of the Timelines podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.